Wisconsin football needs to move on from Luke Fickell. At least that's what my BadgerNotes.com colleague, Seamus Rohrer, believes. It is Talkin Badgers, powered by BadgerNotes.com. I'm your host, Kedrick Stumbris. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumbris. There's no N in my name. You can follow the show, Talkin Badgers, youtube.com/@TalkinBadgers. We are joined today by my colleague, Seamus Rohrer, who does not have a game prediction for us because there is no game to predict, but he's written a couple of pieces for the site, which deserve your attention this week. We'll have them linked in the show description. The first, him giving his definitive take on what should happen next with Luke Fickell. And later in the week, published this morning as we record on Thursday morning, September the 25th, a report card of everyone on the Wisconsin Badgers football team, from the special teams, the offensive coordinator, to the fans in the stands. Truly a cannot miss read if you are a Wisconsin Badgers fan looking to suffer through the pain, and maybe do so with a little bit of a entertaining twist. So without further ado, we will next bring in my BadgerNotes.com colleague, Seamus Rohrer, to the show. We welcome back into the program BadgerNotes.com colleague Seamus Rohrer, returning guest, returning champion. Those who return to Talkin Badgers will be a champion. Seamus, how are you doing on this fine Thursday morning?
I'm great, Kedrick. How are you? Is that a Bo Schembechler reference right there?
Yeah, I did it on Monday. Was it Monday? I don't know. This week is dragging. With Kim Wilhorn, my colleague at SI.com, yes. And I've done the returning champion bit on other shows in the past, and he was like, "It feels good to be called a champion."
Yeah, we could all use that right now, man. We could all use a compliment or something like that.
Yeah, it just reminded me of Luke Fickell going into that quote after the loss to Minnesota, and I was like, maybe I'll recycle this. So
forgot to use that.
Yeah, lots of feelings about Luke Fickell these days, and you with not quite 1,000 words of them for the site the other day, maybe around 500-ish, but the tops among them were Wisconsin football needs. Ooh, why'd it come out like that? Wisconsin football needs to move on from Luke Fickell. Seamus, very definitive statement in the wake of the 27-10 loss to the Maryland Terrapins. And I want to ask you to just surmise your feelings top line. Why a firing? Why now? Why that headline?
Absolutely, man. And I've been someone that has been critical of Luke Fickell in the past, but it never came to this for me yet. And, I think I titled the column, "It's time for Wisconsin football to move on from Luke Fickell." I did that intentionally. Like, I don't know if they can fire him right now. I don't think they have the money to do that. I know the boosters' money is locked up elsewhere. There's all kinds of financial hurdles, but after watching that performance against Maryland, man, that can't be on anything besides coaching, right? Because what boggles my mind is when your supposed best players and your leaders are the ones making some of these really just horrendous mistakes and plays, and when there's this just lack of cohesion from the special teams to the offense to the secondary. I mean, I think I tweeted it out, but just one of the most directionless performances that I've ever watched. And I know that this team is not that bad, right? Like, we knew they weren't great. I know that the win total was set at 5.5. I predicted them to go 6-6 in my preseason column where I broke down the schedule. Like, we didn't think they were going to be that good, but man, it just watching that performance, the disorganization, the cohesion, or lack thereof, just the lack of anything to hang your hat on, any sort of identity, that falls entirely on the coaching. And I've just seen it too many times, Kedrick. It's just the same old song. And I just, at this point, I think that I'm finally out on Fickell, man. And like I said, I've been supportive. You know, I was there at his introductory press conference, man. I still remember that quite clearly. I remember like believing in his vision, quite honestly. And I remember believing in his vision for the program in terms of just, how he turned around the recruiting department, what they were doing with the social media and everything. But I'm out, Kedrick. I can't, what I'm seeing on the field is atrocious. And I've seen enough, quite frankly.
Let me present a competing vision of sorts, because I think it's worth teasing this out. Luke Fickell has had 29 games as the head coach for the Wisconsin Badgers football team. He has had less than 3 seasons, and those 29 games have been marred by inconsistent availability of personnel at quarterback. The same could be said for running back, particularly over the first season, getting into the second season. For as much as I know your quote was turnstiles at offensive line, they've also had a turnstile of availability at offensive line this past season. And the cherry on top to that, which is, maybe an easy cop out to say, but that was a guy he picked, was they are on offensive coordinator number 2 and 4 games into it. And maybe just that tumultuous set of circumstances warrants more patience before rendering final judgment. What would be your response to that argument?
Well, you're absolutely right. Like, you can't argue with any of those circumstances. And I do think that, ultimately I do like some of the steps and the changes that he's made this offseason, right? Like Jeff Grimes hasn't worked out all that well, but again, I largely put that on the lack of availability in the personnel. I do. That is something that I do blame on injuries. Now, that's not to say that he's completely off the hook for how horrendous this offense has been, but nonetheless, you also can point to how good that run defense is this year. It's not something that is being talked about a lot because of just how atrocious the team is. And opponents have just essentially been like, all right, well, we'll just throw it on you for 400 yards if we can't run it on you. But he has made strides this year. There are things where you can say, okay, look, the run defense is a little better. They maybe had a little bit of a better portal class. Okay, the offense is definitely more of a schematic fit, even if it's not necessarily playing out on the field right now, in part due to who's available. I get all of that. But to me, there's a certain thing that you can't put your finger on when you watch a team as disorganized, as uninspired, as just playing with no pride, with no passion, just getting blown out at home by the basketball school. I mean, at some point the eye test doesn't lie. And I just think that I'm not going to sit here and say it wasn't a rather emotional conclusion that I came to after that Maryland game. But I just think that at some point you just have to believe what you're seeing, and people will show you who they are, and you have to believe it. And so I understand, again, all of the hurdles and everything that it would take to fire him, but the product on the field at the end of the day is what matters the most. And you can point to all these other things. Oh, maybe he's doing better in these areas. But when that's what we have to watch every Saturday, I just don't see how you can move forward.
Emotional, but sentiment backed up certainly by at least some preponderance of evidence. Seamus, I want to move on to the column that was published on the site this morning, a report card of sorts for Wisconsin football, 4 games in and sitting at its first of 2 bye weeks this season. And of those receiving, a passing but less than stellar grade is offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes. I think a guy you and I, as we've talked on this show in past weeks, have been pretty high on. We've certainly had our quibbles. But man, if that Maryland game was not just a play calling experience in which it feels like he sapped a lot of his goodwill out from those watching and reviewing his performance. And, by the time, if you had asked me after the Alabama game, what would you give Jeff Grimes? I would probably say something like a B plus. But he gets a C. He gets a C, downgraded to a C after the Maryland game, and I would love to find out what your favorite Jeff Grimes moment of that game was.
Oh, that's a great question, man. Well, I haven't gone into the offensive film yet, so I haven't rewatched the game quite yet. I do recall a couple of handoffs on 3rd and long, just outside of the maybe purported field goal range of Nathaniel Vakos, excuse me. I think that as ugly as that game was, I do think that maybe Grimes gets a little bit of a pass, because how do you call an offense when your offensive line blocks like that? I mean, is this truly the worst Badger offensive line that we've seen in this century? I mean, my knowledge of the program, I'll admit, doesn't go that far back, but holy cow, man. I mean, you can't call an offense with these guys. You obviously can't run the ball, right? I mean, I feel like the running backs are getting a lot of hate. I don't understand how you can be expected to find any kind of crease behind these five. And then I will say that, the pocket presence of Danny O'Neil is an issue, but I do think that it would probably be a lot better if he wasn't, running for his life every single play and or scared that that's going to be the case. So I understand it's very difficult to call an offense under that set of circumstances. And I think Grimes maybe at times gets a little too maybe cute, and just in terms of some of those trick plays that he tries to use. And that is kind of a lot of what his offense is about, right? Is that eye candy. But I mean, he's working with, that first Danny O'Neil interception against Maryland, right? The one that just had no chance, and when he just lofted up there. I just, how do you call an offense when your quarterback is making throws like that? How do you call an offense when your offensive line is blocking like it is? So I do think that he certainly deserves a little bit more of a pass than maybe I would give, Fickell at this point in the season. I think his system is actually very appealing to watch. I love all the motions. I love the under center. It's nice to see that. I love the pro style scheme. In theory, I like zone running, if only they could block it. But so I do think Jeff Grimes deserves much more of a pass. I do think you could critique him for some of those, maybe getting a little too cute, with some of those play calls. But I think ultimately I like what I see from him, and I do just want to see him with a healthy offensive line and a competent quarterback.
What I don't want to see is that direct snap to Cade Yakamele so that he can then pitch the ball back immediately to Danny O'Neil so that Danny O'Neil can throw the ball. I never want to see that ever again. That play, I know you had thoughts about the reverse flea flicker thing at Alabama. I thought that play, which I just described against Maryland, was probably twice as bad. I don't understand what the purpose of that is in the very slightest. Why? Why?
I just think he's desperate, Kedrick. Like nothing else. I mean, you got to try everything you can do to move the ball. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should be calling.
Yeah, they're doing a great job of moving the ball behind the head of a direct snap to Dylan Jones. Great.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, I guess I get the sense of, I get where he's coming from. I don't know that that's how you maybe pump some life into your offense. But it's tough, man. I like he has got almost nothing to work with on that line and back there at quarterback. So I have to give him a little bit of a pass, but just because I I like his vision. I see his scheme and I go, okay, I see what he's trying to do. So I do want to see Grimes with a healthier offense, but um, I agree with you, man, that some of these play calls have been really questionable, and he doesn't deserve to be off the hook for that.
The highest graded on-field group is the front seven, a group which had the fewest tackles for loss in the country a season ago, is not that far off from that mark in sacks as well, and surrendered more rushing yards than per carry than Wisconsin gained per carry on offense for the first time in a decade. And now has seemingly turned those fortunes around. Their pressure numbers, we can quibble here or there with the total volume of it, but I think they have some real playmakers there, and the run defense is solid at worst. An A- for the front seven, Seamus. And do you think it's a sustainable performance given what they've shown on the field so far?
I do think it's sustainable, and what's holding us back from being an A or an A plus is just how inconsistent that pass rush has been. Obviously, I will admit that half of their sacks came against Middle Tennessee. But again, one thing that I actually do agree with Luke Fickell on that he said this season is that overall pressure numbers are way more important, just like bringing havoc and disrupting the play. So I do think they're doing a better job of that. But the run defense, man, and it's funny to me too, because this whole offseason, I have a hard time buying into, hype, especially along the trenches, when it comes to pass rushers, ever since I was fooled by John Pius and Leon Lowry. And it's just hard to tell how well offensive linemen and defensive linemen are playing in a practice setting. So I wasn't sure I bought the whole, oh, well, we're so much bigger on the defensive line, we're going to be a lot better. That's exactly how it works. Actually, they're way bigger on the defensive line. They have like 7 dudes that are 300 plus pounds, and they're way better. I love how that works in the college game. And that's not the only reason. I mentioned it in the column as well. They've got multiple guys that can shed blocks. Last year, it was pretty much just Elijah Hillis, and Ben Barton would get his hands in a couple passing lanes. But this year, man, they can get off blocks. Brandon Lane has some power to push the pocket. Parker Peterson's got some power. You got more twitchier guys like Charles Perkins, J.V.R. Suggs. They can get off some blocks. And then just some of the size of some of those outside linebackers. Tyrese Fearbury has been super athletic. I think he's a great first and second down piece for them. And then Mason Reiger, man. It's just, when you watch him, you can tell that you're watching a pass rusher of a different caliber than the Badgers have had in recent years. So I do love the way that front seven is playing. It's really a shame how their secondary behind them has held up, but I do love what I've seen from that front seven. And it does become interesting, when you think about a team that needs to run the ball to win. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but again, like next week, that would be Michigan. You got a better shot if you have a team that needs to run the ball to win, because this is a team that's only allowing 50 rushing yards per game on the ground, and that's third best in the country.
It certainly paints a picture of, if you have the ability to make a team one-dimensional against their desires, what does that look like compared to what the kind of teams, the kind of power conference teams they played thus far? Seamus, I'm going to give you a little bit of a choose your own adventure for these next two. 2 D grades handed out. 1 D to the defensive secondary, the other to the special teams. Would you like to choose which to pontificate on in this setting?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about the secondary. The special teams is just, you hope that that's kind of just a fluke. I'm not really sure what's going on there. You kind of hope that that's maybe just an amalgamation of all these, of just how bad that game was in general on Saturday. But the secondary, man, I don't know what's going on with the secondary. Now, I know that they're not at full strength, at least where they would like to be, obviously, with Nazir Forkery out. But that doesn't matter, because when your starters, Ricardo Hallman, this is a dude that was an All-American a couple of years ago. I mean, he's been targeted 23 times. I think he's allowed 17 receptions. That's pretty insane for a guy that was considered one of the best corners in the country just a couple of years ago. I mean, he's just getting cooked in man coverage. The safeties aren't helping out over the top. I mean, Deani Hill, Emilio Agard, Jameer Latimer haven't fared much better themselves. Their coverage numbers look a little bit better, but this secondary, I don't, I'm gonna need to dive into the film again. But man, I don't know what's wrong with it. This was supposed to be the strength of the team, and you have experienced guys back there, man. And I know that Preston Zachman being absent from Maryland, that was actually probably a pretty big deal. Because I'm not sold on Matt Young and Matthew Traynor being able to kind of compete at a Big Ten level quite yet. But I get that it might be death by a million paper cuts in that secondary, man. You lose Nizier against Maryland, you lose Preston, and it's just they look terrible, man. They're getting burned over the top. The coverage has been really soft too. Where the front seven has been really aggressive, and coming after the quarterback, sending inside linebacker blitzes up the middle, doing all these stunts to generate pressure. Where the front seven has been aggressive, I feel the secondary has been incredibly soft, just playing a lot of soft coverage. And that's something they're really going to need to address moving forward, because it doesn't necessarily matter if you can stop the run if you're going to give up 400 yards of passing every game. So, yeah, the secondary is still a pretty big mystery to me, man. I'm going to dive into that film and see what I can glean from that. But it's such a disappointment too. And it's finally when they have the front seven figured out, all of a sudden now they can't stop the pass. It's just another incredibly frustrating aspect of this season.
Yeah, Dylan Graff, site publisher, editor, entrepreneur extraordinaire at veteranouts.com, echoed that sentiment on our reaction show on Saturday, which was the thought going into the season for him was the secondary was going to be something of the strength of the defense, if not, a strength at worst. And
100%.
It has been the complete opposite. If you have faith in Luke Fickell moving forward, I think it comes from a place of his ability to recruit and develop, and you give something of middling but generally positive grades on the incoming recruiting class for this season, the 2025 class that has been. Transfers or the true freshman? Where do you want to go, Seamus?
You know what? Let's talk about the true freshmen, right? Because we need some positivity here. And
I think they're the more exciting groups.
Yeah, 100%. They're more exciting. We need some positivity in this show. The future looks bright in a lot of spots, man, especially inside linebacker. I mean, I knew that Catalano especially was going to play, Cooper Catalano. I wasn't sure how much Mason Posa was going to play. But, man, Posa already has a sack. Catalano's got a handful of tackles already. And they have completely usurped Garrison Soliday and Thomas Heiberger in those other inside linebacker spots. Like, they are the third and fourth inside linebackers on this team behind Taka Curtis and Christian Allegra, obviously. So that in and of itself tells you a lot of what you need to know just about how the staff feels about these guys. But, man, they're exciting. They can fly around. And then, staying on the front seven, I also mentioned Nick Clayton, the edge rusher, and he's only played a handful of snaps, man, like 8 snaps or something. Yeah, but he's got a handful. He's got a couple pressures already. And Pro Football Focus actually gives him a really good pass rush win rate, which doesn't necessarily mean he generated a pressure, but from what I understand, it just means he's getting off of his blocks very well. And the eye test tells you that as well. Just from some of his late game performances in some of those bye games. So I do think you got to like what you see from some of those true freshmen in the front seven. And then I think I talked about Eugene Hilton too, man. He's got, 2 catches. Thought maybe he might be a little more involved, but to be honest with you, just Vinny, Anthony, and Jaden Ballard look like it's hard to take them off the field at wideout. So, but man, he's super talented, and he was never he never looked like a true freshman in spring practice and in fall camp and now on the field, even just the 2 catches for 17 yards. He never looked like a true freshman, and he's got a very bright future as well. So I think you have to be excited about a lot of these young pieces. But, how much they're going to contribute to winning games this year is probably very minimal, unfortunately.
Finally, and I'll give you the option here. It's your work after all. Would you like the platform to cook on Barry Alvarez, student section, etc., or should we make people click over to the site?
Yeah, let's give people a chance to read that one on their own. I don't want to butcher my own. I don't want to butcher my own take on that, but yeah, I think that look. Obviously, Barry is one of the most respected figures in Wisconsin football history for great reason. He completely turned the program around by himself. But that was one of the worst takes that I've ever seen, and I think that people might want to see what I have to say about it just in my column there, because man, coming after the students, especially these students that the seniors have seen a 7-win season maybe as the best year. I don't know, Barry. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's worth clicking in. We'll have it linked in the podcast description. Both of Seamus's columns from this past week. It is Wisconsin football needs to move on from Luke Fickell and grading Wisconsin football at the bye week. Seamus Rohrer, any final thoughts before we go into Michigan week? We'll have you back to preview the game and get your thoughts a week from today.
Well, I will say just kind of the sentiment I brought up a little earlier in the show, which was that, I haven't really done my research on Michigan yet, but man, they need to run the ball to win. And Wisconsin's pretty damn good at stopping the run. So we'll see how that plays out. Excuse me. We'll see how it all plays out. It'll be a second straight game against a dynamic true freshman quarterback, Bryce Underwood, obviously this time in the maize and blue. So I do think that, it helps that you have a bye week maybe to try to fix what's going on in your secondary. I do think just top to bottom, they're still incredibly overmatched against Michigan, especially on the road in the big house. But it is interesting, going to play a run-heavy team with the way that this defense is playing. You'll see what kind of shot they can give themselves, basically.
It definitely makes you take a second look at the very least, regardless of how you think about the Wisconsin Badgers football team. That is Seamus Rohrer, BadgerNotes.com columnist. Seamus, thank you as always for joining the show.
Kedrick, always a pleasure, my man. Happy to be here.
Thank you to Seamus Rohrer for joining the show. If you have not watched last night's episode yet, or After Dark episode, where one Brandon Cooper has stolen the Declaration of Independence, you're going to want to check that one out here, either in your podcast feed or youtube.com/@Talkin Badgers. Hear the song, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, show your support to our good friend Seamus Rohrer. I know he would appreciate it. I know I would appreciate it. We'll be back soon. I got a take I've been ruminating on. I previewed it a little bit on last night's After Dark show about Paul Chryst, the end of that era, Luke Fickell, and what Wisconsin does from here. So we'll have that coming in short order, and you'll get it in your feed as soon as it drops. As long as you subscribe. As long as you subscribe, you're going to get it right away. So stay tuned. This has been Talkin Badgers, powered by BadgerNotes.com. I've been your host, Kedrick Stumbris. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter. You can find Seamus on the website formerly known as Twitter, Seamus_Rohrer. Find his work linked in the podcast description. Well worth your time. Until we talk to you all again very soon on Wisconsin.